I'm proud to welcome Hina Jilani to the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Hina Jilani was the first special advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations on human rights defenders. She also served on several high-level United Nations fact-finding commissions, including the Fact-Finding Commission for Darfur and Gaza. Hina Jilani is one of the most preeminent human rights lawyers in Pakistan and has played a leading role in dismantling laws and practices that discriminate women and children and minorities in Pakistan. Hina, your career as a human rights leader spans the contemporary history of Pakistan. Starting in the 1970s, during the time of Zia-ul Haq, the military dictator of Pakistan who launched the Islamization of laws, as well as the Hudud Ordinance, which saw women as second-class citizens, you played a prominent role in challenging those laws and in rolling back some of the most draconian provisions of those laws. Can you share with us some of the snapshots during that era, but also the ways in which you, brick by brick, built some of the leading institutions that have endured up to now, including the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, the Women's Action Forum, and then, of course, the first ever women's law firm, the AGHS law firm?
Yes, Rangita, this was the end of the 70s and almost the whole of the 80s, when there was a military coup in Pakistan and a military government took over and, as you may know, ended civilian rule and in fact hung the popularly elected Prime Minister. This was a very turbulent time for Pakistan. And in order to legitimize the takeover by the military, the leader of the military at that time, General Zia-ul Haq, used Islam as a legitimizing factor for removing the civilian government. And one of the first things they did was to change some laws on the pretense of bringing them in conformity with Islam. Now, whether they were in conformity with Islam or not remains a controversial issue in Pakistan. But what they certainly did was discriminate against women, against non-Muslim minorities in Pakistan, and discrimination was not just subtle, it was a very blatant discrimination, relegating women to a second-class citizenship, and in fact also exposing them of risks that would deny them their right to due process, that would deny them their right to access to justice, and that would in fact expose them to criminalization without any fault. So these were some of the laws against which the women in Pakistan rose up. Now, the women's movement in Pakistan today, if you trace the history, is really the mother of the human rights movement in Pakistan. You mentioned organizations such as the Human Rights Commission, the Women's Action Forum. Women Action Forum actually preceded the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, which is an NGO. And it was the light that women were shining on what are human rights that made a class of people in Pakistan aware that we need to organize in order to promote and protect human rights. So that's how the Human Rights Commission came into existence. My own law firm was also in many ways a response to the times. Of course, we were women lawyers, four of us, who decided that we wanted to set an example by showing that women have a place in the public domain and that we as professional women must show that by setting up an all-women law firm. And then, of course, also make a commitment to giving access to justice to all the marginalized and vulnerable communities, and also to women.
So your narrative is really a fascinating paradox and really showcases this kind of dichotomy in Pakistan, where women came to the forefront to rise up against laws that devalued them and dehumanized them. But the women's movement was the most important resistance movement against Zia-ul Haq. So can you speak to that seeming paradox?
Yes, I mean, Pakistan is a country full of contradictions. On the one hand, we are a part of South Asia, which is not a stranger to human rights struggles and movements, which we've been doing in one name or another for centuries. But at the same time, it is also a country where people have been able to manipulate culture and religion in a manner in which they put people under oppression with the motive of controlling the population. Women understood that at that time. And the first consciousness we had was, this is not Islam. This is somebody's desire to control the population through fear. And this was how we responded then. And, women's rights, I keep saying, can never be promoted in isolation. The smart thing we did was made these linkages with the political movements that were going on at that time, and other social movements like trade union movements. And, we tried to get people to understand that women are an entity. They can engage with you and give you something and also take from you. So I think this was the way that we were able to bring women into the forefront and the women's struggle as a basis for everybody to promote democracy, to promote human rights, and the whole question of bringing back in the Pakistani civil society a desire to make themselves heard.
So can you say a little more about the misappropriation of Islam in drafting laws that devalued women? So I want you to speak about the zina ordinance, as well as the qisas and the diyat, which allowed men to commit crimes against women in an environment of impunity. And those crimes have been unusually termed honor crimes. There's nothing to do with honor about those crimes, but it is about dishonoring women, dishonoring men, and dishonoring Islam. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I think it certainly does dishonor Islam, because the effect of these laws was, for one thing, a victim of rape could become an accused of what we call zina, which is extramarital sex with consent. Young girls, 13-year-olds, were sentenced to lashes. Pregnant women, as a result of rape, were accused of zina and criminalized and imprisoned. This cannot be something that any religion allows. So, and that's common sense. You don't have to go into the details of what that religion says and what it doesn't. It is common sense that no religion, which is the religion of millions of people in this world today and who have that faith, can ever be unjust in that manner. The other thing was about this honor killing thing. They changed the penal laws and made murder a compoundable offense, which means that you can compromise. So if a person has murdered somebody, the family of the victim can compromise and forgive that person, and that means that under our law, that a compromise that is accepted by the court means there is acquittal for the accused, which is not just impunity, it is also it also, they don't even have the stigma of the crime sticking to them. So it's not just forgiveness and they're avoiding imprisonment. It's impunity in the real sense, because that means acquittal without any blame. So this is, I think, something that we are still grappling with. We now do have laws against honor killings, which have in some ways controlled the damage. But at the same time, unless you tackle the real issue of compromise, which means those who are killing their own women are then forgiven by people from within the same family, and benefiting from their own wrongdoing has to go. So we are still in that struggle. However, I must say that as far as the zina law is concerned, while the law still remains on the statute books, certain amendments which the women's movement was able to get in the laws have actually made it a dysfunctional law. So while the embarrassment of the law still being on Pakistan's statute books still remains, its actual consequences now are in many ways curtailed.
And would you say that one of the reasons for this change is because women like you championed the fight to dismantle these laws, but also you had victims of honor crimes, women like Mukta Mai coming forward and putting a face to these crimes and really speaking against these crimes and humanizing these issues in a way that was so powerful?
Mukhtar Mai was actually a victim of the zina law.
Mm-hmm.
She was a woman who was the victim of what we call an illegal but an informal court,
mm-hmm.
Who gave a verdict in their locality against her brother,
mm-hmm.
against whom there was an accusation of raping a woman
mm-hmm.
from another family. They gave the verdict that the other family
mm-hmm.
has a right to rape a woman
right.
from her brother's family. So Mukhtar Mai was actually raped.
And it was a blood crime.
As a result
mm-hmm.
of a judgment
mm-hmm.
by an informal and illegal court that was held. So she epitomizes a situation where the victim then loses the right to justice in many ways because of the complications that the law presents in terms of procedures, and these are in many ways compounded by the social attitudes and the biases that our judiciary still retained at the time that this case was happening.
So can you tell us a little bit about the blasphemy laws and the ways in which the accused is often threatened with the death sentence for allegedly defaming the Quran or a slight against Quranic injunctions?
The blasphemy law is one of the most controversial legislation that was brought in by Ziaul Haq. For one thing, it has a very flawed legal basis, and secondly, it has been used and abused for political purposes. The legal flaws in the law are that this is one criminal law perhaps in the whole of the world where intention is not the basis of conviction. So you may or may not have intended to commit blasphemy or defile the name of the Holy Prophet, but what the listener has subjectively understood becomes the basis of the accusation. The other problem with this law is that there is a mandatory death sentence. So if the court comes to the conclusion that blasphemy or the certain kind of words have actually been used and those words would amount to blasphemy, there is no other sentence that the court can award except a death sentence. Thirdly, the political consequences. Pakistan is already, because of Ziaul Haq's policy and the extremist ideology that he imposed in Pakistan, it has already become a very divided society. And the divisions are more sectarian than just between Muslims and non-Muslims. Sectarian means Pakistan has several sects of Islam, and the population practices different kinds of sects. So within the sects there are dangerous divides where sectarian killings and hostilities are at their height. So this blasphemy law has become a tool in the hands of sectarian groups to target and punish the others. Once you make an allegation of blasphemy, that person's life is worth nothing. Whether he is tried by courts or not, you can be sure that somebody will come and kill her or him. Then the other thing is the marginalization and the fear of becoming victims of the blasphemy law amongst the non-Muslim minorities who are already weak because of their minority status. And then they feel that these sectarian groups and the religious fundamentalist groups are targeting them. This has also become a tool in the hands of certain people for private revenge. So the minute you have a land dispute or other kind of dispute with another person, you can easily say he's committed blasphemy, and before that the court can see whether it is blasphemy or not. That person really undergoes terrible time, if not actually being killed.
As a leading human rights defender and lawyer in Pakistan, you have faced many death threats and risks to your own security and your life. Can you speak a little bit about the ways in which you address those threats and the ways in which you live with those threats and you continue to champion these human rights causes in spite of these death threats?
Look, one of the essence of being a human rights defender is that you should know what the risks are, because if you are challenging very powerful forces, there will be retaliation. So it's not surprising for me that those threats are coming. Of course, I'm not, a very courageous person, and everybody is afraid of these kind of threats because we know that these people have the power to execute those threats, and there will always be impunity for it. So yes, I do have fear, and I am as careful as I can be. But what do you do? Is there any option? There is no option. There is a course which you can follow in order to make your environment more pleasant for yourself as a woman or as a citizen and as a human being, or you can sit back and tolerate things, and my being afraid and giving up my work will not stop the trends that I'm fighting at all. They will still continue. So what the answer will be, I will be afraid and still living in a frightening environment. If I fight back, whatever the consequences may be, there is still hope that we will be able to drive those trends away. So for me, there is no option. I have to fight back.
In 2000, you were appointed as the first ever UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on Human Rights Defenders. And as the first mandate holder, you were privileged in defining that mandate and in shaping that mandate. Can you speak to the ways in which you, as the first mandate holder, held accountable states parties to the Declaration for Human Rights Defenders and the ways in which you worked with governments to hold them accountable?
Well, actually, I think being a human rights defender myself, it was not difficult to pick up the strong messages of the declaration and apply them to situations which we face every day. I think my first strategy was to be able to go to places, pick up cases, and bring them to light, because all my life I have understood this, that in the abstract people don't understand the essence and the importance and significance of a particular law. But when you bring a face to the problem, then the injustices that are ensuing from the law, or the strength of the law through the protection that it provides for against injustice, they become more important. So the first two things I did was first create networks of human rights defenders, because I think the best kind of security that human rights defenders can have is through larger and stronger community of human rights. Secondly, I made sure that I was bringing out enough cases from different countries to show that it is a real problem. Where human rights defenders are attacked, there is no chance that human rights can be promoted. So these two things, I think, were the basis on which I spoke to governments. Many governments, I do believe, did cooperate very well with my mandate. Of course, there were others who did not, but they did it at the cost of their own population. And when the population is disturbed, it is not pleasant for any government to be in a position of governance, because they are not liked by their own citizens. So I think it is really in the benefit of governments themselves. It doesn't benefit the United Nations to have a satisfied population at the national level in any country. It goes to the benefit and strength of a government. So they have to understand that there are certain rules of governance, and that one of the most primary rule there is to respect your people's right to dignity and right to human rights and other fundamental freedoms. So I think this is all that we as mandate holders of the United Nations do, make governments aware of what their duty and responsibility to protect is, and where they are lagging in that responsibility.
In an age of growing violent extremism, and violent extremism that has an impact on women and really muffles the voices of women human rights defenders, Hina Jilani's voice is a clarion call to action. Thank you, Hina, for your inspiring life and work, and we look forward to welcoming you back to Penn Law School very soon.
Thank you, Rangita.
Thank you.